It turns out that a pearl's color is determined by the oyster's outer edge or its lips. Something fun to think about the next time you're applying your lipstick. Discover the value of your story.
So this award lets me know that
good morning, bonjour, comment ça va? Et toi? Ça va très bien. Bienvenue, buon bienvenidos, benvenita, benveniti, namaste, and welcome. Welcome to another exciting episode of Gem Hunter Stories. My name is Barry B. Mixon, and I am a gemological storyteller. And each week, what I do on this show is I take the art, science, history, and magic of gemstones, precious metals, and fine jewelry, and I put it all together into a story. What I discovered over the years and what I discover each and every week is that many of the same characteristics, the same concepts, the same traits that we so highly value in gemstones and precious metals we find in people. So what I do is I take those stories and I use them as a template, as an inception point, as a bridge to help people, to empower people, to sometimes remind people to take time to discover the value of their stories. And not only the stories of the people, not only the stories of other people, but to remind them of the value of their own story. Where are you in your life? The story of your life. What chapter are you in the story of your life? Who are the characters? What is the direction your character, you, are going in your story? As most of you know, thank you, Barbara. As most of you know, I just came back from this incredible adventure in France. I was in France for an entire month, and it was a magnificent experience. I'm not even the same person. Even though I've been going back and forth to France, I live in France part-time. Even though I've been going back and forth to France for 9 years, this trip, this adventure was completely different. In fact, as I began to the last week, I've been getting to tell people about my adventures and what I described to one person that basically I just came from a place called Once Upon a Time. And in order for you to understand that, you have to understand where I came from. What was I doing before? How did I get to this place? This is Ajaccio. This is literally this is the country of Corsica, the birthplace of Napoleon, and this is the city of Ajaccio, where he was born. And as I was telling some of my friends and family and viewers, even some of my Toastmasters friends about this adventure, one of the things that I began to understand is that just like a gemstone, you need to, people need to understand where I came from, why this place why did I consider this place a place where called Once Upon a Time. Just like pearls, this is the month of pearls. Happy birthday to anybody born and everybody born in June. Pearls is your gemstone. And I didn't really always understand pearls. My mother didn't have pearls. I didn't grow up with pearls. But once I began to understand what a pearl is, once I began to understand how rare pearls are, only 1% of all the pearls ever found is good enough to be considered jewelry. Most pearls are not symmetrical. Most pearls actually are pear shaped. In fact, the word pearl comes from a Roman word. Basically, it's similar in sounding, pearl. Okay. Once you understand that pearls are literally come from pain, pearls come from a parasite, a a bacterial infection that is implanted in the sex organs of an oyster. Once you begin to understand how uniquely special pearls are the only gemstone that comes from a living organism. Then you begin to understand what pearls mean, why pearls for thousands and thousands of years. Cleopatra, one of the famous stories of Cleopatra is how Cleopatra owned two of the greatest pearls at that time in history. And she had a bet with Mark Antony that she could create the greatest party in the history of the world. And what she did was she took a goblet of vinegar and she took one of her pearls and put it in the goblet, let it dissolve, and drank it. And the pearl was worth millions and millions of dollars, and she won the bet. And when you begin to understand what pearls are, Julius Caesar traded a pearl, a black pearl, that they think was probably worth $500 million just for one of his wives. So when you begin to understand what a pearl is, when you begin to understand how was it made, what's the chemical composition, all the different colors of pearls, then you begin to understand its value. You begin to understand a pearl's value because you understand a pearl's story. And that's the same thing as I was talking to my friends. I was talking to Barbara. I was talking to Jeff Stein. Hey, Jeff. Jeff asked me a question about my life. How did you become homeless? And I realized that although I've been telling people that I was homeless, I never really explained how I got there. You see the person I am today and you say to yourself, or the accomplishments, the things, and you say, how did that happen? Jeff told me that I needed to basically tell and how did the whole gem hunter concept begin? This is the logo of my company. These gemstones, rubies, emeralds, sapphires, citrine, which is quartz, diamonds, and of course gold. The whole history of mankind revolves around that. So what happened in my life that made gemstones, that made this whole concept of storytelling resonate with me? So let me tell my origin story. As most of you know, a lot of you know, 32 years ago, 32 years ago, I was homeless. In the winter of 1992, I was homeless right here in the city of Chicago for a year. For a whole entire year, I slept and lived on the streets of Chicago. And when people hear that, they look at me and go, well, how is that possible? And what people need to understand is I did not become homeless because of some of the things that most people think causes people to be homeless. I didn't drink. I still don't. I mean, I drink wine. I like wine, but I've I've never been drunk in my entire life. I'm the kind of, in fact, when I was in the Marine Corps, people wouldn't even hang out. My fellow Marines wouldn't hang out with me. They wouldn't invite me anywhere because Sergeant Mixon, he's a teetotaler. I can have 1, 2 drinks and be good. And probably want to go to sleep. I've never been drunk in my life. I didn't become homeless because of drugs. I don't take drugs. I'm 62 years old, and thank you to God, I am on absolutely no medication whatsoever. I don't even take aspirin unless I really have a bad headache. So I didn't become homeless because of that. I became homeless because of anger. Yeah. That's the reason why I became homeless. See, my mother was, and I've told you many times, my mother was an alcoholic. My mother was a serious alcoholic. My mother was an angry, mean alcoholic. And please don't turn off your cameras, because it's not that kind of story. I told you many times, I love my mother more now than I've ever loved my mother. More now at 62 than I did at any point in my life. Why? Because I understand her story. I understand how she got there. But back in the day, when I was a kid, I didn't. My mother let me know in every way possible that I was nothing. That I was nothing. I've told you many, many times before that I thought my name was asshole until I was 12. Barry was just kind of like a nickname. So I grew up thinking that I was nothing. And I remember thinking I wanted to be everybody but me. Everybody but me. So when I saw Star Wars, May 25th, 1977, and it was interesting because I was in France last month during the 46th anniversary of Star Wars. I remember looking at Darth Vader and I wanted to be him. I am Darth Vader. I understood his pain. I understood his anger. And if you know the story of Star Wars, Darth Vader's whole turn to the dark side was because of his anger. So he resonated with me from the very beginning. I can remember sitting in the Lowe's Valencia Theater in downtown Manhattan and looking at Darth Vader. When Darth Vader choked that person from across the room, I said, that's what I want to be when I grow up. And that anger consumed me. My heart was so black. For years, all I wore was black. In the Marine Corps, my call sign was Vader. If you wanted something bad to happen to anybody, you need to call me, because I was patient. I'd wait for you. And that anger filled every cell of my body. And because it was a cancer, because it grew and grew and grew, it ate me up inside. So I became homeless because of bad choices. I got with bad people. Every woman that I was with, every person I was with, especially a woman, especially the 2 women that I married, basically were offshoots of my mom. Because what I was trying to do was prove to them that I was worthy, that I was enough. And many of you totally understand exactly what I'm talking about. So when I came to Chicago, in the summer of 1992, and by the winter of that year, I was homeless. The person that I was with that I moved to. I was in California. I moved to Chicago because of her. And once she realized that I wasn't going to be what she wanted me to be, I wasn't enough. Literally, one day I came home, we were living together, and I came home and she had these two big giant white cops. I mean, they were huge. It was like, I'm 6'1". They had to be 6'6", 6'5", huge. And I remember them coming into the house and I was like, what's going on? And the officer told me point blank, you need to be out by Friday at sundown. And I looked at it and I said, what is this, the Wild West? And he reached down to his gun, pulled his revolver out slightly and said, it can be if you want to. And I remember, okay, I got to go. And it's interesting. Her name was white woman, and her name was Karen. To be honest, which is really funny. And I remember Karen telling me that about this place called Pacific Gardens Mission, which because I had just come from California, I thought Pacific Gardens was like, oh, okay, how bad can it be? I didn't realize it was a shelter. That was, those of you who live in Chicago, right on State Street. That was the day I became homeless. That was the day that I realized that it was over, that the walls was closing in on me and I had nowhere else to go. So by the time December came along, homelessness actually started in October 92. But when I really conceptualized, understood where homelessness was, it was around December 15th to be exact. And I remember thinking to myself that, okay, this is it. This is the end. Despite all the things that I had done, I had 3 degrees, biology, chemistry, biochemistry, Marine Corps, all kinds. I've written papers for the NIH, all before this, but because of the anger that was inside of me, here I was homeless. And I remember thinking to myself, okay, I'm going to die. This is it. This is the end. And I didn't go to the Bible because I didn't grow up really in a household that we went to church. And to me, the Bible, I didn't really believe in God in those days. God was for everybody else. And for me, even though I really believe in God, I respected that other people did. So for me, I wasn't going to go to the Bible because to me, I thought that God would say to me, oh, I see. Now you believe. Now now that you're in trouble, now you believe. And I didn't want to come to God like that. So I just said, okay, I'm just going to accept whatever my life is. And that's when God brought me, not the Bible, but he brought me a different book. And I remember sitting in that dumpster, literally holding this book. And I've showed you this book before, and I'm not going to go through the whole thing, but I remember reading this passage, dream lofty dreams. And as you dream, so you shall become. Your vision is the promise of what you shall one day be. Your ideal is the prophecy of what you shall at last unveil. Dreams are the seedlings of realities. And I used to read that every single day. I used to read that every hour on the hour, the whole thing. I used to read it in rainstorms and snow when I was freezing. I used to tell some of the other guys that I was homeless with and they was just like, oh, shut up. They did, because I had to believe that in something, that my life meant something. And what this book told me is that all I had to do was dream. And later on, I began to understand that dreams are like prayers. And prayers, the next level to prayers is a story. Is the way I understood that a prayer is kind of like describing a beautiful place, beautiful trees, beautiful lake, beautiful mountains, beautiful river. But when you tell a story, what you're telling yourself and what you're telling God and the universe is how you see the whole thing. That's what As a Man Thinketh talks about, is being able to understand the story, being able to create the story. And what happens is, the way it works is that once you begin to tell yourself a story, what happens is you begin to believe it. You begin to believe. So when I read that part that said, here's a youth hard pressed by poverty and labor, confined long hours in an unhealthy workshop, unschooled and lacking all the arts of refinement, but he dreams of better things. That was me. I had nothing. But this book told me that if I imagined it, if I could see it, if I could dream it, then it would happen. And it doesn't happen right away. It doesn't happen over time. Sometimes it takes 32 years for that to happen, for that dream, for that prayer, for that concept that you have in your mind to happen, because you have to tell yourself a story in order to understand the value. You have to tell yourself a story. There's nothing more important that you can do in your life than tell yourself a story, because that is the only way you get to value. That story that you're telling yourself over and over and over and over and over again is how you get back to value. You have to tell yourself a story, because nothing has value without a story. So I call this, when I live in France, this is where I live, in this little tiny town called Tele. Spelled like taller, but it's spelled Tele, right in the southwestern part of France. And before I even get there, as I was there, I began to realize that everything that I was doing, the reason why I was there was because of the story that I told myself 32 years ago. That everything that I had done in my life came as a result of that story. People, when you understand stories, even understand that passage in As a Man Thinketh, and again, it's not the whole book. This is like 5 of his books. James Allen wrote the book. I'm talking about just 2 pages. 2 pages. And I began to understand that once you begin to understand, tell that story, once you understand the story or the value that comes out of that story, and you begin to believe it, the magic is how that story comes true. That story becomes true because the universe, God, has no other choice, literally no other choice but to give you that, because you believe it so much. It's so much of a part of you that it comes true. So in order for you to understand why I claim this place as a place where a place called Once Upon a Time, you have to understand where I came from. You have to understand that for a whole year, all I dreamt about was just being somewhere else, being in a place where I was respected, being in a place where I was loved, being in a place in my life where there was food. And that's what made me start to think about just how here I am. Here I am in a place that was just unimaginable 32 years ago. And yet here I am. I remember a time when I was on the streets. I remember it was a winter time. Actually, it was around fall. And I was walking down this Michigan Avenue. There was a restaurant called Bennigan's, which is not there anymore, COVID and everything else. But there was a restaurant that had a big picture windows and everything else right on Michigan Avenue, looking at the Art Institute. And I remember walking past one time. That's all I did was walk back up and down and just do something. There was a group of people being seated, and they were sitting down, and the server was actually, he was already seated, but the server was bringing them food. And I remember that one of the people had, this guy ordered, at least it was next to him, the guy ordered a bowl of pea soup. And I was so hungry. I was so hungry that day. I remember just that day, I couldn't find anything to eat. I was just, every movement hurt because I was so hungry. And I remember walking past, looking at it, and I tried not to stare that much. It was like literally just staring in the window, looking at this food, being wishing that I was there. And I remember walking away. And when I came back, the people that were sitting at that table were getting ready to leave. And what struck me was that bowl of soup, that bowl of pea soup, he had only halfway eaten. I cried for I cried for a long time. I mean, I'm talking about days. I cried. I cried so much I didn't think I could ever stop crying, because all I knew was that here was a man that had a bowl of soup right there, and it meant nothing to him. He just walked away from it, and I would have given anything to have that soup, to taste it, that bread that was sitting in that basket. Fast forward 32 years, I met this wonderful gentleman named Stefan. And Stefan has his own story. Stefan literally grew up in France. He moved to Madagascar, and he had jobs that he didn't particularly like and things of this. And there was something inside of him that wanted him to make bread. Le pain, okay, pain, Pain is bread in Francais. And I remember last time I was in France tasting his bread that was just indescribable. And I wrote a post on Facebook about his bread, what it felt like to me. And he was so moved by what I wrote in his story, was that he said, the next time you come, you have to come and see my restaurant. So he invited me to his home. And he has beautiful kids, and his wife is Lova, is from Madagascar. And he said, in 2 days, Ken, come by Wednesday. It was a Tuesday. Come by my restaurant. Come by my boulangerie, a bakery. Le pain d'ici. The bread is here. Little place. And he invited me there, and when I walked in, a little place, just this little storefront, and it's an organic French bakery. And I was there, in there with five people who didn't look like me. It wasn't my culture. None of them. Actually, the guy in the orange and stuff, and his name skips me right now. He was the only one. He lived in Canada, so he knew a little bit of English. And what was so beautiful was that they invited me in. They invited me in this studio, this place to create bread. And when you understand what bread is in France, I told you the last show, bread is religion in France. Napoleon became Napoleon because he understood the relationship to bread and the people. And what was so beautiful was that they invited me in. They invited me in as an equal. They invited me. This young lady just was so excited that I was there. And they took me and they showed me how to do the bread. They showed me how to mold it. I can still feel the 2 weeks later, I can still feel the dough in my hand. And it was just an unbelievably sensuous experience. I could feel every molecule. I could still feel it. Just the texture of it. I've held women in my arms didn't feel, it felt as good as that bread. And then to be able to, I remember being able to flip it. And he taught me how to flip the bread and turn it, and then to take it and to kind of plop it up at the middle, and then to pour it into this canister. And I remember just the way it felt to pour it into this baking pan. And he said, tomorrow you have to come back and eat your bread. And I came back. Here's me and Stefan before I left. And just the beauty of taking something that once upon a time I would have done anything to taste bread. And here I was in a place called Once Upon a Time. And the next day I went to Le Pain d'Ici and I got my bread. This is my bread in this nice paper bag. And I got a chance to open it up. This was something that I created in my hands. And I was able to take that bread, and it was like art. It was so beautiful to me, because I knew what it was. I knew where it came from. I knew how it was made. I knew, and I remembered when I didn't have that. And I opened that bread up and I took that bread and I put butter on it. So now here's something that was just a sensual experience to my skin, to my hands. And now I was able to take that same bread and bring that energy inside of my body, all in a place called Once Upon a Time. So we'll talk about more the next experience I had when you come back from the other side. That was there's so many different things that I could talk about my experience. I have thousands of pictures from not just all my years of going to France, but this thousands of pictures. But the thing that moved me the most, the thing that I will remember forever, was my experience playing the game of pétanque. Pétanque is a simple game. It's just three balls. It's just three balls. In Francais, it's pronounced boule. Okay, Boule, boule. There's three of them. These are my bulls. Okay, and you notice on it says Napoleon Noir, the Black Napoleon, because I'm actually the only African American in the whole entire region. There's like, I don't know, 10, 12, 13 towns all around. I'm the only one. And what was so magnificent, this is called a boulodrome. A boulodrome. This is simple. This is like a stadium. And you have to understand that pétanque is like baseball here. In fact, the game of pétanque is an ancient game. It started in Greece, ancient Greece, and then the Romans got a hold of it. And because Rome conquered like most of Europe at that time, especially France was called Gaul at the time, they brought the game of pétanque. Well, actually, it wasn't called pétanque. They got that game to France. And it wasn't until about the Romans were playing with rocks. So the town that I live in is literally a town that's been around for 1,000 years. The Vikings were there. The Romans were there. So pétanque started as a game throwing rocks to test their warriors, their strength of their arms and their wrists of their warriors. And then in 1907, right in the south of France, right in actually it's in Marseille, where the game of pétanque was invented. So when you play pétanque in the region, in Calais, in the southwest region, you're playing like baseball in the United States. And this is the game. You start out with three balls in the ring that you stand in, and these little balls in the middle are called the cochonnet, the little pigs. And What was so the hardest part about being homeless, because I was a Marine, because I had gone to jungle warfare school and urban warfare school and all these things, the hardest part for me about being homeless was being alone, being invisible, not having anyone to talk to every single day. I remember when one time, probably the worst day I remember being homeless is one time I had to go somewhere and I just didn't want to walk. I was tired of walking. I talked to the bus driver and he let me get on the bus. And I got on the bus and I sat way in the back and I hadn't taken a bath in, I don't know, 2 weeks. And I smelled to high heaven. And I remember people getting on the bus and people getting on the bus. And as they got closer and closer, because the seats were in the back, they would sit there, start to, and look at me and just, go back. So by, I don't know, maybe like 15, 20 minutes later, the bus was crowded, but everybody was in the front of the bus. And I remember the driver stopping the bus and he said, "Yo, man, I'm sorry. I know what you're going through." He decided, no, he said, "I know you're going through a lot right now, but I got to ask you to leave." And I remember being so embarrassed. I mean, nobody knew who I was. Nobody knew what I did in the Marine Corps. Nobody knew about the degrees and all it was. Nobody. All they saw was this just funky, just dirty black man. That's all they saw. That's all they saw. And I had to get off that bus. And again, I remember just, oh, it was horrible. And yet, 32 years later, here I am playing this beautiful game with a group of people who didn't know me from anything, didn't know me from Adam. This is my team, going from left to right. My left to right. This is Hugo. Hugo is the son of Renault. Okay, Renault is such a wonderful. Renault is, well, all of them are like my brothers. Okay, this is Jean Louis. Jean Louis. Okay, everybody in French is like Jean. Everybody, Jean Louis, Jean Marc, Jean. So this is Jean Louis. Jean Louis is the deputy mayor of Calais. He's the one that owns. If you watch my Facebook post, he's the one that owns the chicken and duck farm. And this is the end is Marco. There's only really three black people in the whole town, and two of them, Lova is one. Lova's sister, Andrea, is the other, and then Marco. Marco comes from Madagascar, and Marco is like a national champion of pétanque. And what was so beautiful for me was to be in a place where people just accepted who I was. When I first started playing, I didn't know what to do. And Alan, I don't have a picture of Alan, but Alan just came in and just said, "What are you doing?" And Alan speaks no English. So we were going, I had rough English, rough French, and Alan had full-blown French. And we're going back and forth, and he's teaching me how to play this game of pétanque. And he's teaching me, and my technique is kind of unique because it literally is a balance between what I learned how to shoot in the Marine Corps and balance and physics. And I started playing this game, and it was wonderful. It was wonderful because it was a place where people came together, and there was just community. Every time we finish playing the game, we get together and we share thoughts and we share ideas and we share stories. And you notice that nobody looks like me there. Nobody, young, old. And it was, I just remember, this is Francois. This is Francois and his wife, Francoise. And Francois, you can see Francois is a big guy. This picture doesn't really do him justice. Francois is a big guy with huge hands. He has hands like the Hulk. He could probably just take your head and just. And I remember Francois looking at me like, like, "Who are you?" Yeah, because he's like the local champion of the regional champion of pétanque. And I started playing and got better and better at it. And one time, I actually the last time I beat him. And in French, when you play Patong, if you get what's called if you get like the game is 13 to zip 13-0, and it's called a funny. And I remember my team, me, Renault, and Terry, we played against Renault and Francois and two other guys, and we beat them. He got a fanny. French, they don't like to lose. Francois hates to lose. And he's sitting and looking all whatever. But the level of respect that we had for each other, just the level of respect. I remember everybody was trying to get me to tease him, and I just said, no, this is Francois. I said, so I will give him a fanny. And when I came, he was sitting on the bench, and I came up to him, and I just, in French, you greet people all the time. The two in that region, you kiss on both sides of the cheek, bisou, bisou, bisou. And Francois he's one of these guys that always has like bristles on his face. So when you kiss Francois, you're literally getting like your skin is like exfoliating every time. And what I remember about that was that I kissed them and we just held each other as men. It was just the brotherhood. And him and his wife, Francoise, invited me to their house. And it turned out, once I understood his story, it turned out that his father was my mother. His father told him that he hated him. And yet on that day was actually the next day was Francois and Francois' 42nd wedding anniversary. And instead of going out doing this, he wanted to invite me to his home. This is Catherine. I've never shown you. This is Catherine. This is the person who sets up everything in France. Catherine is French to me because everything I do, all the places. This is Catherine, who I met years and years and years ago, and Catherine has been instrumental in my understanding what it means to be French, what it means to live in this culture, what it means to live in this world. This is me. This is Marco. I went to the clubhouse, my first team meeting. And this is, of course, Marco, who is just Marco and Terry are both extraordinary players, extraordinary human beings. And what was so wonderful for me was to go from a place where 32 years ago, I had no friends, no family, nothing here for a year in the city of Chicago. Now I had a family. It's not that I don't have people here that love me. What got me was that this was a place that I dreamt of. This was a location. This was an environment that I dreamt of all those days sitting in that dumpster, thinking by myself. The only things that were around me was the rats and the roaches that were around me. And now here I am. Here's Renault. Here's Renault. Who again, the couple of times that I've gone, has taken me in as a brother. And this is what we do. This is why this is a place for me called Once Upon a Time. It was unbelievable. It was unbelievable that my life, that story, dream lofty dreams, and so you dream. As you dream, so you should become. This is it. This was the place. And I told someone, last month, I felt so magnificent that if I was to make my transition and I get the opportunity to go to heaven, that I told somebody that if I went to heaven and I look around and if it doesn't look like Talay, I want to go back. Not because heaven is not a beautiful place, but just the brotherhood. The just human beings loving each other. Be in a place where the color of your skin did not matter. I never thought of myself as a black man the whole time I was there. I was an American, yes. I was big, yes. I came from Chicago, yes. In which when I started playing petanque and beating them and stuff, they was like, go back to Chicago. But imagine being in a place where it was never about the color of your skin. It was everything that Martin Luther King talked about, just not judging a person by the color of their skin, but by the content and the character of their heart. That's what I experienced. So I wanted to bring you to this place. I wanted to show you, and I want my life, and that's what this show is about. I want my life to be the promise of what I told God. I told God on that day that I thought that death was imminent, that death was any point in time. I remember telling God that if he could somehow get me out of homelessness, if he could somehow restore my heart, if he could somehow make me feel that I mattered, that my life mattered, that I had value, that I would spend the rest of my life helping people find value. Because there's so many people. There's so many people that I've met in my journeys that's just like that. Stories far worse than mine. Stories of people, of family members, of mothers and fathers and family members, women who have been, touched completely inappropriately, raped, all kinds of things. There's so many people that grow up in their lives and they don't feel the value of their story. So versus telling you about all the wonderful places that I saw in France and the history of this and everything else, what I wanted to let you know today was what happens when you believe in your story. What happens when you see yourself in a different place? What happens when you begin to understand that whatever you do, whether you cook, whether you clean, whether you wash, whether you have kids, whether you're a teacher, a doctor, a lawyer, whatever you do in your life, you have to get to the point at some point, hopefully, that you see your value. You see who you are. You see how your life touches other lives, and how and you get to the point you realize how not only how your life touches other lives, but how people's lives touch your life, the characters that are in your story. In order for you to understand that, for order for you to get to this place, imagine, I want you to understand that this guy that's standing in the Mediterranean Sea on a beautiful French sunny day came as a result of this book. And when I say this book, of course, I'm talking about God, because God put this book in my hand. I told you how this book came about. I was in San Francisco and this book literally jumped out of a bookcase to the point where I thought somebody threw it at me. That's how much force was behind. And it landed on this page. It landed on this page where I have the mark. It landed just like that. And everything that I have been doing, everything that I've succeeded in, everything that I've accomplished in my life came from understanding what happens when you dream. Again, like I said, a pearl comes from something as beautiful as a pearl comes from something that was horrible. Those of you who have ever had a UTI, a urinary tract infection, understand the pain of that. That's what pearl, and pearls start out as men. They start out as males and then they change into females. But out of that pain becomes something beautiful, becomes something poignant, becomes something that you sit back and remember where you were once upon a time. I think so many people, not just in France, but so many people in my life who have helped me, okay? become the person I am today. So many. I don't even want to list names because there's so many. You talk about the old adage of a village raising someone. I'm the result of that. And when you begin to understand, what's helped me is my understanding and training in gemology, and that's how I got into gemology. Once I started studying gemology, I began to understand the analogies. I began to understand that every gemstone has to be found. Every gemstone has to be cut. Every gemstone has to be polished, and except pearls, but pearls come from pain. Pearls come from pain. What we're celebrating every time you see a pearl, if a pearl is your gemstone because you're born in the month of June, you are you have a gemstone that represents what happens when you begin to understand the value of your story. And I'm not saying that pearls or oysters are conscious of that, but you are. You can be conscious of that pain. Whatever that pain you're going through in your life, see how it fits into your whole characters, whole characteristics, how that character, how that person, how that pain, how that mean and horrible thing that happened to you. What can you do with that? That's why I love my mother so much today. Because even though my mother was not Mother of the Year, will never be considered Mother of the Year. I know when I get to heaven, the first thing I'm going to say, Mom, and she's going to be like, what do you want? And I'll be like, okay, it's you. But I understand that she taught me how to read. She taught me how to imagine. She taught me how to understand stories. And I'm the kid that when she sat me down in front of a television, just really to get me out of her hair. And I watched movies as a child, Johnny Quest, and I'm dating myself now, Johnny Quest and Mutual Omaha, Wild Kingdom, and Indiana Jones. It's amazing that the last Indiana Jones is coming out, and now that's the life that I live. In all those things, the movies, the stories, the places that I imagined came because once upon a time, I had a dream. Once upon a time, I had a story. So what I'm going to do, and I'll talk more about it the next time, is I'm going to create a petanque club right here in the United States because I want a place for our children, American children. It's inexpensive. It's a beautiful game where you come together. It is so, even though it's simple, it's elegant. It's community, it's strategy. It takes years to develop. I want to bring that game here because I want children to not have to go through what I went through. I want children to understand the importance of their story, their value. So I hope that you enjoyed today. I hope that I brought you France maybe in a different way. And I don't know what I'm going to do next week. It'll be about pearls, but I hope you're here. And your homework assignment is to think about what makes you special. Think about where you are in your story of your life. Who are the characters in your life? And then think about what you can do with your story. You're the director of your story in whatever way you create your story. So again, thank you for being here. My name is Barry B. Mixon. I am a gemological storyteller. And please, always take the time. Take them, even if it's just a moment, to discover the value of your story. So until next week, au revoir, à te tella, voilà. Here's a fun gem bit. It turns out that a pearl's color is determined by the oyster's outer edge or its lips. Something fun to think about the next time you're applying your lipstick. Discover the value of your story.